from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Hurricanes, wildfires, floods, heat waves. I don't know about you, but as an already stretched thin mom, the possibility of natural disasters is something I'd rather not think about. But no matter how much I want for this not to be our reality, it very much is. Today, we're taking a deep breath and learning tangible ways to prepare and bring our children along on the journey.
I think you don't want to worry them. You don't want them to feel that they're vulnerable every day. So I think you would say, although we don't expect we'll need to evacuate, there may be moments when we have to do that. And it's really good just to be ready so we stay safe.
Welcome to Healthy Children, the podcast for parents from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. I am a pediatrician and a mama figuring it out. This is a judgment-free space where all questions are good questions, and the answers will hopefully be even better. Let's get started. Our guest today is the doctor everyone calls when a traumatic event has happened in a community. As you can imagine, he knows a thing or two about talking to children about these things, and he also knows what works and what doesn't in the preparation. Dr. David Schonfeld is a developmental behavioral pediatrician and director of the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. David, welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
Let's start with something that really hits home for you. You're in LA. How are parents and children in your community doing?
Well, unfortunately, the area that I live in is very close to Eaton Canyon. So I'm about 6 blocks away from the edge of where the fire got to. And so we were evacuated for about a week. And the schools in my community, many of them have not reopened yet. And we're very close to Altadena. And a lot of that community has really been destroyed, and there have been a number of deaths that have occurred. So I think what's happening here in the schools that we're talking to is some of them are not open. If they are open, it's very hard to coordinate getting information to them. So I only have talked to individual families and small presentations about how to support children. And a lot of them are really, of course, struggling. They've lost their homes. They don't know where they're going to live. They're trying to figure out how to not only support their children, but what they're going to do for the future.
Of course, such a difficult situation to find ourselves in. And of course, all of us hope that that's never us. But David, the reality is, and you know this better than I do, that it very much can be us. So to take a step back, what can we do? Where do we even begin to prepare for these things should they ever come to our neighborhoods?
Yeah, well, the first thing is to kind of understand that you may feel emotionally impacted by this, even if it happened very far away. We call it a loss to your assumptive world. We make certain assumptions that if we take reasonable steps, bad things won't happen to us if we are good people. And then we realize wildfires, in my community, it's a suburban community. We're not surrounded by forests. So this is not the area where you would expect it to happen. But sometimes these things do occur. So first off, understand that if you're feeling unsettled and vulnerable, even when you don't objectively think you're at much risk, it is understandable. It's part of that kind of threat that occurs. Then I think you take, appropriate steps. Talk to your pediatrician, get involved, and find out what disasters are more likely in your community. It might not be wildfire, it may be flood. It might be severe ice storms. There's something in almost every community, unfortunately. And so you want to figure out what is it that you should be concerned about most. Then I would take practical steps to try and decrease your risk to this. So it might be that if you're in an area that's prone to wildfires, is there something you can do to your yard or to your home that would decrease the risk of embers starting your house on fire, for example? And then be prepared if you do need to evacuate. So, for example, you want to make sure that you have paperwork in a place that's accessible. I actually already have paperwork in a binder that has all the important information about our house. It has information about the land that we're on. It has information about all of our insurance policies. So I grabbed that binder and put it in the car. So I think be ready to go. And as a pediatrician, you're going to want to focus on what does your child need? Do you have medication that your child takes every day that you have another supply to be able to go someplace with? Do you have information about your child's medical care? What are the things that are most precious to you? So think about what you might do if you had to leave quickly. And then just make sure you're ready to take care of your child and what your child's needs are. It's a little hard to say know where you're going to evacuate because it depends on the disaster.
Of
But think about
course.
what you would do and how you would do that.
Yeah, no, of course. David, and again, as all of us saw the recent wildfires in LA, it made me think. In the past, I did evacuate when I was in college in Florida because of hurricanes, right? But that was a little different. Hurricanes go by and you sort of go back. And for the most part, up until a few years ago, there were communities to go back to. I think things have changed so quickly in the past couple of years. So just to go back for a second, we're talking important documents. We're talking things that are really important to you. Hopefully you've backed up all your photos, but perhaps there's something that's really important to you that you want to put in your go bag. What else in terms of safety should be in our go bags as something like this perhaps happens in our community?
Well, I think you're going to want to have things that you're going to need for the next couple days. So clothing that you can wear. That doesn't have to be exactly what you would want to wear. I mean, it is a disaster. You don't know when it's going to occur. So you pack probably like 5 to 7 days of clothing, whatever you would use for toiletries. But again, in our case, my wife forgot her toothbrush. It's like, okay, I have an extra toothbrush because I travel a lot, but the hotel has toothbrushes and there are places we can drive to. So you want to think about what it is that you might need for the week. I do have to say, though, you can take everything that's precious to you. So there's a certain amount where objects are not as important as the safety of people. And I really would discourage people, first off, taking things that they consider precious and leaving it in a bag that's out, because that's not a very secure way of doing it. And even when you evacuate, you're not going to be in a location probably where you can keep these securely. So that's why when my wife was like, should we take this? Should we take that? I was like, we're taking ourselves. We went very quickly from a warning to an evacuation order, and the wildfire was spreading quickly. So my reaction was, it doesn't matter where our things are. Right now, we have to go. And we have to make sure that those around us, if we can help them, let's help them. But then we have to leave. And so I think it's not going to be a smooth transition, but you want to make sure you have the medications you need. You have some written down information about your medical history and that of your children so that if you go someplace else, you can attend to it.
And I very much appreciate you focusing us again and centering us on that, because even in the way that I asked you my question, right, I'm like, well, should we pack our precious things? Because that's our natural tendencies as human beings with memories and real lives, right? But I think just remembering that our safety comes first is so important. So I so appreciate you centering us a little bit on that. David, to bring children along on the journey, let's say as we are packing our go bag, hopefully it's ready in advance, is something that just lives in our house. How do we incorporate them? What tips do you have to bring them along?
Well, I think you don't want to worry them. You don't want them to feel that they're vulnerable every day. So I think you would say, although we don't expect we'll need to evacuate, there may be moments when we have to do that. And it's really good just to be ready so we stay safe. Why don't you think about some of the things you'd want to put in the bag? So engage them in collecting things. But you don't want them to put their favorite toys there because they're going to want to use them day to day.
Right.
So, to be quite honest, I don't really have a go bag in the same sense I think people most think about a go bag, but I travel a lot. So I actually have a duplicate of all my toiletries. So I can easily just grab that and put it in a duffel bag, which is right nearby, and throw extra clothing in. So I was packed for a week when this happened, but I can actually pack in about 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know that everyone in the United States should have a go bag every day, but I do think you should have a plan, and you should have certain items that you're going to take that relate to health and safety. But as we were leaving and we see the fire out our window, it was an uncomfortable situation. My wife was like, well, we need cash. And I go, I have some cash. We don't need more. The banks are open. We can drive to them. Let's go. We don't need to collect everything, but let's collect what we most need. So I think it's a good idea to collect some of it. But personally, they say things like collect a week's worth of water. Well, I don't know, in Los Angeles, if you evacuate for a wildfire, you're going to be able to find some place where you can buy water or get water. So to me, I don't know that that's as important. If you're sheltering in place, you need that. But to be quite honest, we have water for several weeks, but they're all expired. So if you're going to purchase these things, you have to continually rotate the stock. You need to make sure you take care of that so that it will be there when you need it and can be used.
Now, David, let's say that we have to evacuate right now, right? And I have to turn to my 3-year-old and say, we got to go without scaring him and bringing him along in a way that is developmentally appropriate. How would you say it? Let's start with my 3-year-old, perhaps.
So I would start by telling them what you already know in simple and clear terms. For example, there is a fire. It's not too close to us right now that we have to be worried that we're in danger, but it does mean that we should leave the house just in case it spreads. I would avoid speculation. I would avoid trying to tell them what it might mean. So if a child asks, does this mean our house is going to be destroyed? I would say, we don't believe that at this point, but the most important thing is for us to get to safety now. So let's leave. But I think that there sometimes is some warning, and I would share with the child that there's been a warning if it's concerning to you. So you could say, oh, there seems to be a fire. It's far enough away from us now that we're not an immediate threat, but we may want to leave if it starts to get closer. So when I tell you that's happening, you need to do that. And I would just say it calmly, tell them that that's what you're doing. Say, we're putting together a bag. Maybe you can think, is there any other thing you'd want to take with you if we needed to leave sometime in the next several days? So then you kind of can say to a child, the fire is far enough away. It's not going to hurt us. I don't know whether or not it's going to hurt our home. So we are worried about that. But most important now, we have a place to go and we're going to be safe. And then you get in the car and you go there. If the child says, I want to finish watching a television program or whatever, then I think you have to say, no, we have to go right now. It's important. But trying to say it as calmly as possible and trying to emphasize, you know what to do and we can do it and we will be able to stay safe, I think is what you want to communicate.
Yeah. And David, we're talking about children directly impacted by disasters, but there's another conversation we should have. I'm working very hard to help my child understand the world in a way that feels appropriate for his age. So David, how can parents at home even explain to their kids some of these natural disasters we mentioned and why they're happening?
Well, I think the first thing is to ask them what they already have heard. Children tend to overhear things, whether it's through the media, conversations. Even if you try and block their exposure, they still get exposed. I went to one community, this was after the mass shooting at the movie theater and during the Batman showing at midnight. And the family had really tried not to let their child know anything about it. They didn't put the television on or the radio, didn't talk in front of him. Maybe like 6 weeks later, they suggested going to a Disney film. And the child said, we shouldn't go to the movie theater. They're shooting people there. He was about 5 years old. He was just about to enter kindergarten. And when they asked him how he found out, he had heard in the swimming pool at the Y when he was going for a swim lesson. And one of the other children had told him. The reason I mention it is the mother said, not only did I feel bad that he was upset about this, but I felt even worse that he didn't feel he could come to me because we didn't talk to him, so he didn't talk to us. So start by asking, have you heard about what's happening? It's all over the news, so there's a very good chance they've heard. Then I would give them a simple explanation about what you know has occurred without speculating. You would say that there was a fire that occurred in an area of California. It's actually multiple areas. They have very dry weather there right now, and they have risk of fires. And it spread quickly, and a lot of buildings were burned, and that's why people are upset about it. I wouldn't start speculating about whether or not that's going to happen where you live. I wouldn't start saying things like, I don't think California will ever be the same. Or, I don't know if we can ever go visit. Just tell them simply what's happened and then ask them what questions they have and if they have any concerns or would like any other information.
No, absolutely. I think the concreteness of it all as parents, right? Without speculation, without getting into, additional areas that our children are not even asking us about or worried about, right? David, I also want to ask you, for children, like children in your community who have been through this, how do we help them? How do we all keep an eye out for them? How do we make sure that they have what they need to process what has happened in their community?
So part of it is we have to restore as soon as we can some structure and predictability that allows them to return to kind of more of a routine. So you may not be able to tell them when you're going to be able to get back into your house, if you're going to be able to stay in the same community, but you can tell them what time dinner is. You can tell them what you're going to be doing tomorrow morning. You can let them know whether they're going to school tomorrow or not. So whatever you can share with them about their routine and put in place some structure and predictability is useful. We also then have to ask them how they're feeling. Is there anything you're worried about? We tend to assume that children worry about what we worry about, but that isn't the case. So they have different concerns, worries, fears, and things that upset them. So before we try and reassure children, we should ask them, what is it that you're concerned about? What questions do you have? And then when children tell you they're upset, we have to avoid saying you shouldn't be upset or no, it's not that bad. We should tell children how to cope with distressing feelings instead of pretend that they don't or shouldn't have them. So I think we have to open the conversation and then we have to allow them to express how they're feeling.
And those feelings will change, right? The fear of the evacuation might go away, but the loss afterward will take a much longer time, right?
Yeah, well, that's a really important distinction. What does occur is when your home is destroyed, or even if your home isn't destroyed, but other parts of your community are, you get a sense of loss and grief. And that's very different than trauma. So in trauma, we have to deal with something that happened. But in grief, we have to deal with the absence of something for the rest of our lives, something that was important to us. You know, I've been talking to some parents who lost their homes, and when I explain, you're probably, based on what you said, experiencing more grief. And with grief, we want to reconnect with what we've lost. We want to stay connected. We don't want to stay connected to the traumatic experience, but we do want to stay connected to what we've lost. That's why when someone dies, we go to cemeteries to visit them. It does remind us of the distress, but it's even more distressing to forget what we lost. And that grief could be, that's the place I used to go for ice cream. That's where we would celebrate my birthday, and I'm not going to be able to go back there again. And so I think we need to recognize that it's just not trauma that people have gone through. To a large degree in natural disasters, it is grief. And we need to be able to talk about and re-experience the feelings that we had of those positive parts of our life that are no longer there. And that grief isn't just from destruction. After Maria, they found in Puerto Rico in one study that the majority of children had lost someone important to them. But it wasn't actually from the hurricane. It was from the relocation off the island as a result. So if your teacher leaves because their home's destroyed, you lose that person in your life. They don't have to die. And so there were just a lot of cumulative losses that people experience after natural disasters. And sometimes they just don't understand why it's so upsetting. But that's part of what it is. So understanding that phenomenon, I think, guides how we support them.
So important. And David, before we go, we like to end every episode with what we call a parenting prescription. So when it comes to natural disasters and preparing for them, what is one thing you want all parents to remember?
Well, one thing I would want parents to remember is that natural disasters, losses, and crises happen in our lives, and children, just like adults, are affected by them. These are actually life-changing events, so they change who you are. So you don't forget these things, and that isn't the goal, to forget them. But simply because we've been through it doesn't mean that we are damaged. If we come together as a community and as a family, if we're able to restore structure and safety, if we're in loving and nurturing environments, many individuals, although not the majority, but many will actually develop what we call post-traumatic growth. They emerge with a new sense of importance of things in their lives, sometimes more spirituality, a greater sense of community in some situations. And many devote their lives to helping others as a result of having been helped in these events. And they also gain skills that they may be able to use to deal with future adversity. They become more resilient. Now, it would be better never to have gone through the crisis event in the future. And I'm always cautious. I don't want to tell people, This is good, because it isn't good. Even if you develop post-traumatic growth, it would be better not to have had the trauma. But the issue is that kids are not necessarily damaged by stressors that occur in their life. So I just hope that families realize that most people emerge with a real sense of future and can have healthy, normal lives despite having been through a natural disaster. Of course, it takes a long time to fully recover. So we have to provide support through that period. But you shouldn't feel your kids are destined to be damaged.
I can't think of a better way to wrap up our episode today. Thank you so much, Dr. David Schonfeld, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you and home for joining us. If you like the Healthy Children podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help us spread the word. Follow Healthy Children on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Healthy Children AAP. And be sure to visit healthychildren.org, the parenting website of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Healthy Children is a production of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our creative team includes
Laura Alessio,
Catherine Beard,
Garrett Brown,
Zach Christman,
Ann Johnsos, Kathy Jewell,
Doug Nagel,
Jackie Ortega,
Susan Stevens-Martin,
Mary Claire Walsh,
Hannah Weston.
And our theme music was composed by Doug Nagel. We'll be back next week. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. Thanks for listening.